Well, let's start with what you've already told me. You're cautiously interested in a variable prepaid forward contract, Vpfc. It promises to you effectively cash in some stock without paying tax on the gain. I gotta tell you, the IRS is all over this kind of transaction, but yet it hasn't litigated many of these examples because of the fact that because they're not really confident in their ability to win them.
Yep. In a nutshell, my stock in Overtech Incorporated is worth about $289 million. I could get 85% of that now by essentially agreeing to hand the stock over 4 years later. In the meantime, if the opinion of the promoter of this structure is correct, I won't have to pay tax on the capital gain. What happens in the year when I'm supposed to turn over the stock is another matter. I may be able to do another VPFC and postpone the gain for a few more years.
Well, I can tell you this. Whether or not this sort of thing works or doesn't work, it shouldn't depend on how complicated your promoter makes it. It either works or it doesn't work. That's the view of the IRS, and I think they're right.
So you think it won't work?
I didn't say that. If we're that simple, then no one would be doing these VPFCs in the first place. But quite a few people, and there are people out there, very clever people, who are doing them and who have hired good tax advice and are continuing to do them.
There's a chance it will work then.
Yes, there is. And there's also a chance that you can spend a significant amount of money battling the IRS in a court of law if you get involved with one of these.
Okay. You know, your attitude towards them puzzles me.
Well, let me put it this way. There's no way I would write an opinion letter guaranteeing that one of these would work, or that I think that you wouldn't be subject to tax penalties for reporting your income in reliance to this particular type of shelter.
Well, of course, that was clear to me from the outset. I'm just here for your expert advice. The big question is, should I take the chance, knowing it might cost me something in legal fees? I read in Bloomberg News that Red McCombs, the founder of Clear Channel, used a VPFC to save about $45 million in taxes on the sale of some of his Clear Channel stock. He settled with the IRS and paid about half what he would have paid if he hadn't used a VPFC. And Hank Greenberg, who used to be the CEO of AIG, used one to cash out $278 million on stock he won't have to deliver until 2014.
But the IRS has targeted these types of transactions in consolidated issue paper. It's an in-house interpretation of the law, not binding the public, and none of them have worked.
Well, what about the particular one that I'm looking at?
Right, okay. You own appreciated stock in a publicly traded corporation. And to cash some of that stock, you're thinking of entering into a VPFC through a stock purchase agreement, an SPA, with an investment bank. In exchange for an upfront cash payment from the bank equal to 85% of the current fair market value of the stock, you will agree to deliver a variable number of shares in 5 years. Instead of delivering the shares, you can pay money instead, equal to the value of the shares, which will also equal the upfront cash payment you get at the outset. There's more bells and whistles to this, but primarily that's the heart of the matter.
Okay. And I know you're going to tell me about those tax problems.
We'll get to that soon enough. I can tell you right now that the IRS has a very strong argument against these types of transactions, and they feel that they're invalid. It all centers around what we call a realization. You don't usually pay tax on a gain inherited in appreciated property until you sell or exchange that property. You can almost never escape paying tax on a gain if you do sell or exchange appreciated property. That's what the code calls realization. The key features of realizations are protections against the downside risk of continuing to own the property and immediate access to the use of the gain. Now, the VPFC has both these characteristics. First, you're economically well off if the transaction is respected for the tax purposes, as if you would have simply just sold the shares. That's because there's a minimum number of shares that you need to turn over to satisfy your obligation to the bank, which protects you against a big decline in the stock value. And yet you have access to most of the value of the shares right away, just as if you had sold them. And second, you can diversify the holdings by investing your cash and get into other stocks or investments. As you probably know, many other transactions are treated taxable precisely because they allow the taxpayer to diversify her portfolio.
But isn't that what would happen if I borrowed against the value of the shares and gave the lender the shares as collateral without giving a promissory note?
Yeah, you're putting your finger on the reason why the IRS hasn't shut these types of transactions down already. They look like perfectly ordinary non-recourse loans. Non-recourse loan limits the lender to keeping the collateral in the event of default by the borrower.
So you'll advise me on this?
Well, isn't that what I'm doing? Of course. Like I said, I'm not going to write up an opinion letter, but I'll tell you what I think and the reasons why I'm thinking it.